We release dopamine, we release norepinephrine, anandamide, endorphins, and these neurochemicals keep us in flow, but they're also natural medicine. And so when we train our nervous system that, hey, look, we're getting into flow states more often and for longer and deeper, we're actually reprogramming our system to be in flow more often. So we raise our baseline level of flow, and we also tend to see the world from a happier perspective.
Welcome back to the Power and Purpose podcast. I am Vanessa Soul, your host. Thank you so much for investing your time and your energy into tuning in to today's episode. I greatly appreciate it. Today's guest, I'm super excited. We have Anthony Palacin. He's a mental health educator, peak performance mentor, and spiritual guide. After being diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2017, Anthony rewrote his story, safely transitioned off of medication, and dedicated his life to helping others access natural flow states and optimized mental performance. So that's why I am super excited for today's conversation. Anthony, thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So my signature question is, who are you and who are you not?
It's a great question. But I identify as is a piece of consciousness, just like one, if the whole universe is a puzzle and it's all interconnected, I am one puzzle piece that is inseparable from the rest of it. Um, and what I'm not, I would say nothingness, although it's a bit of a contradicting one, because I have had the experience of nothingness, and that's it's kind of a contradicting non-dual idea. But yeah, that's what I would go for.
I love that. That experience that you had, I have to ask about it. We were supposed to kind of continue with the conversation, but is it a short story or just like a quick glimpse that you can give us into what that was like or what it felt like or when was it?
I've had a couple of them actually, both naturally induced and psychedelic induced. One of them was a classic ego death, and one of them was almost like feeling my body as one of the first molecules, either right before or right after the Big Bang, but like feeling it. And that was under breathwork and music after, during a naturally altered states kind of retreat.
Wow, I just had a visual. I love being a clairvoyant because I literally had a visual that was probably very similar to your experience. Thank you for sharing that. Those are profound experiences and tell me what you think, but I think those experiences allow us to detach from identity when we want to. What do you think?
I think absolutely 100%. We we gain this idea of identity as a way of navigating and being in the world, but deep down, there are so many things like the spiritual aspects, the consciousness nature that science has not yet figured out, that is more real than reality itself. And this is beyond any concept of identity, I think.
More real than identity or more real than reality itself. That resonates. So let's talk a little bit about your journey prior to like the expression that you're in right now. You had a journey with your bipolar diagnosis. So what was that like? Was it chaotic? Was it gradual? What was going on during that time?
Yeah, it was quite chaotic and very unpredictable. It was very much linked to, so at the time I was just transitioning towards quitting my first job. I used to work as an engineer in the automotive field, and for various reasons, I had decided on quitting and moving. And the day before my last day, I was sent to a conference where I met a very highly ambitious, visionary entrepreneur. We connected on such a deep level. He invited me to dinner with his team. And I was thinking, we had chats that maybe we would collaborate. And I'm sharing this because I think this was a big part of the trigger behind whatever it was that happened in my sleep that led to the psychosis the following night. And the psychosis was when I got up, I looked outside the window, and I thought I saw a black hole. And from there, my body started getting into a panic mode. I became manic. I was starting to say things that were really weird. And there had been a little bit of background of this happening when I had first experienced a camping music festival in a forest several months prior. But the level of mania went not quite towards impossible to operate in society. I eventually landed back down because it was such a powerful and transformative experience. But for some reason, this other episode that happened when I had the black hole vision, that landed me in the hospital. And when I filled out all the papers, it was very clear to the doctors, this guy needs to be interned in here for some time. And so, yeah, I was just really lost, confused, very high energy because I was feeling like there were some obvious truths that I was landing into, and that I was getting some visuals in my head about the nature of reality, but impossible to know what they were based on and impossible to communicate about them sanely. And so I felt like I had to play this role of an avatar to kind of trigger people into making these realizations like, don't you see what I see? Um, and so, yeah, that landed me in the hospital for 9 days, put on schizophrenia meds, knocked me down, way down after a little bout of rage from the confusion that I had for feeling like I was locked up in a prison and not knowing why. That was the most important piece. Like nobody had a heart to heart, sat me down and said, you're here because this and this and this was happening. Or maybe they did, and I have no conscious realization of it. And if that's the case, then it was meant to happen. But regardless, yeah, there was rage, and then the medication numbed me down enough to kind of get into the groove of being in the hospital, and then getting well enough to manage it to get back out. But now with the diagnosis of bipolar, with schizophrenia meds, and having to do all these things.
Okay. And say it again. What was the trigger for this initial experience?
I think a big part of it was actually not having a plan for where I was going. I was living in the US at the time, and I had chosen to move to Europe to be closer to family. But I didn't have a job lined up, I didn't have a plan, and I was leaving my the life I had built for 6 years in the US at that time. And I was leaving my girlfriend, I was leaving my possessions, all of this with no plan. But the trigger itself that might have been the spark behind that buried stress was the meeting with that entrepreneur, and the kind of, it happened during the night when I I woke up suddenly and somehow was pulled to looking out the window and thinking that I seen a black hole, and just got into an agitated state. It's really, that's my experience as I recall it. Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
And I don't know if I'm thinking into this too much, but you tell me. So was there something that in the conversation that happened with the entrepreneur? Of course, we're not trying to blame anyone or anything. I'm just genuinely curious. I understand the black hole happened later that night, and that's a lot of energy to witness and a lot of energy to deal with. So yeah, have you ever thought back and reflected? Was it something in the conversation, or do you just remember that that was the day that you had the conversation and then the black hole? Like it's just like a milestone in your mind where you were able to kind of timeline wise understand that that was the day that things started to shift.
There were a couple of specific aspects about that conversation that really added a synergy to the mania. One of them was the level of ambition and level of skill that they had. I had never met somebody that had that big of an ambition, just like I did. I had always um, I had always had big ambitions. I became an engineer because I wanted to solve big problems. Um, and I finally felt like I met someone that I could partner with and we could accomplish really big things like multi-million, multi-billion level planet energy system saving kind of scale type of things. So that was one thing, the ambition level. And the second thing was the heart-centeredness behind it. There, this was without going specifically too deep into automotive stuff, but the way that climate crisis and pollution and all this is going, he and I actually connected that we wanted to solve big energy problems and like create a world that is sustainable. And we talked theoretically about how we could do it. And the biggest blockers were actually politics, economics, fears, not really the technical aspects. And so it just kind of got my mind into a very high dopamine, high creative, highly motivated state to have this conversation with them. And I think that was a big part of not only what kind of triggered the grandiosity desire that was already in me, which was obvious when I was having manic bipolar symptoms, but also, yeah, that psychosis, or maybe like a, it's hard to say whether it was a psychosis or whether it was a dream or whether it was a vision or whether it was a spiritual awakening. And that's actually the way that I see it now. But all of this kind of came crashing together in my brain at that time.
Thank you so much for sharing in detail. Um, Again, I felt like I was just part of your journey, like watching it like a movie, and just under for understanding and compassion. So you said you were in the hospital for 9 days. How long of a span of time were you navigating the bipolar or taking the medication for schizophrenia before you started to shift into a new way of integrating and healing and recovering?
It's a great question. So there was a transition period in between two episodes. That one that I was talking about was my first significant episode. I had a second significant episode happen 2 years later. And in between the two, I was on medication for a little bit and then I came off of them. And the reason behind that was the chat with my psychiatrist in France had concluded with, well, it was all related to the drugs that I had taken. And if I don't take any more drugs again, then maybe I will never have drug-induced psychosis or mania and so on. Um, I was able to spend more or less a year, year and a half without medication, but some things in my system, and now I know what they were still pulling me towards substance use. And the fact that it wasn't directly correlated that I would take a substance and then have psychosis or mania meant to me that it was not necessarily the culprit. So it took until a second episode that happened, which also had multifactorial triggers, um, that then I got into a space of groundedness and, okay, now I'm not only not gonna take substances for a while, I also kind of was forced into going inwards because of COVID happening. And I started exploring spirituality. I started meditating more. Um, I had found a strong sense of purpose already right before that second episode, and that was, I think, part of the factors behind all of that excitement. So I was very into my work, but it's that second episode that really grounded me and got me into the safer, more cautionary side, where I was really wanting to deep dive into the truth about what happened, why things were the way they were, why it was that sometimes I take substances and nothing happens, and sometimes I did, uh, and also improving myself naturally first before um, before anything else. And that's when I discovered the flow state neuroscience. And then a little further down the line, I learned about trauma, and then I connected the dots a lot more.
You alluded to something. You said if the substances weren't the culprit, you were able to pinpoint what the thing was. What was it?
There was a big part which was trauma related. Now, there was a trauma when I just turned 5 years old. My mother was sexually assaulted while I was, I don't know, 10, 20 meters in another room, just starting to sleep, or maybe not yet sleeping. I don't recall consciously. But my dad was not home. He was at work at the moment that that happened. And somehow I energetically or actually physically perceived what had happened. But not only that, then I imagine the impact that that would have had on my mom, and my perception of the impact that it had on my mom being resulting from my own blame. And even though all of this happened, I had no recollection. It was completely buried in my unconscious. And I did not know about it until my mom told me when I was 30 years old. And the reason that it even came up to the surface is because I had done so much self improvement naturally. I had learned about health and spirituality and found a purpose and all this. And I was still dealing with body issues. I was dealing with binge eating disorder. And I couldn't break binge eating disorder, no matter how much willpower and no matter how much education and no matter how many like gadgets or whatever I would try. And that's when I learned that it's probably in the unconscious, and that's what led me to discovering trauma. It's what led me to having the conversation with my parents, and then my mom told me that she had a pretty key piece of information that she um, didn't feel that I was ready to have when I was having my bipolar crises. And that's, at that point, I had been stable now for probably 3 years post my second episode. And then she told me about it, and I cried tears that I felt had been locked into my system for 25 years. And I was like, okay, this is a bigger part of the roots than whatever I thought the other things were. Like my brain was trying to assign causes without having the full information because the wounds were so deeply buried and so unconscious. And for me, that was the game changer that really rewrote my story.
Wow, wow. And it makes so much sense, at least when we're somewhat on the other side of it, why these breakdowns, if we want to call them, or these chaotic experiences, emotionally chaotic, mentally chaotic, physically chaotic experiences can almost like erupt in our lives because that suppressed memory was like locked away within inside of you, taking up so much energy. It takes a lot of energy to stuff something down and to keep it contained, especially from IFS, the IFS therapy model, internal family systems, like those different parts of us they're tired. They're trying to contain. They're trying to compartmentalize. They're trying to keep the suppressed stuff down until the body can't do it anymore. And then we have those moments. And very interesting. I love recognizing patterns. That's one of the reasons why I'm an astrologer. But I'm recognizing a different pattern. You said something about this happening when you were around 5, and then it kind of coming up around 30. You and so many other people, as a healing facilitator, integration facilitator, coach, whatever you want to call me these days, I've heard that there's a pattern there. Something happened at 5, like before 7. Yes, that's very common, but 5 and 30, there's some type of correlation. I don't have the answer, you guys. I'm just planting the seed in case anyone else decides to get a download on it. That also happened for me. I had a traumatic experience that I witnessed at 5, suppressed it, locked it, blocked it down. It didn't pop up until my Saturn return during a plant medicine ceremony on my 30th birthday. So very interesting. We'll have to ask the universe, what is it with 5 years old and 30? Any thoughts on that?
I don't know if there's any correlation. Yeah, five's an interesting number because it's still in that range where brain is developing, especially the core part of the brain. Like a lot more happens between 0 and 7 than between 7 and 20. But
Mm-hmm.
5 is maybe at like between 0 to 3, it's you're less conscious of what happens. There might be these memories that are buried in our system, nervous system, emotions, etc. But I feel from 4 or 5, we start having conscious memories. Like I don't remember any of my life prior to age 4, none of it. But age 4 or 5 is when I start having pictures and ideas of what my life history was like. And I think maybe that could be the reason. And I think 30 is really key because of the Saturn return, the transition away from 20s, where your brain is developed, you've done all that unconscious experimenting, you've done a little bit of exploring in life, and now you're kind of grounding into a version of you that is a bit more permanent. And so you're seeking these answers, or you're seeking to understand yourself, and you're really seeking to be grounded.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm curious to know your perspective on what is a flow state and why it actually matters.
It's a big question. I was just recording a training about this. I separate the practical material benefits of flow state from the spiritual and emotional. And I think they go hand in hand, of course. But let's start with what is a flow state first. So flow is a state of consciousness. When you are so absorbed in an activity that you lose your sense of time, this is the most obvious characteristic. Hours will fly by and it feels like minutes, or minutes will pass and it might feel like an hour because of the activity being so intense or emotional or whatever it may be. That sense of time dilation, time distortion, is the biggest indicator that you were just in a flow state. So a lot of people will experience this in activities that they are passionate about, whether it's creative activities or like a work passion, or just something that they really enjoy doing. So that is a flow state. There's also another characteristic of flow that could help identify it more easily. There's a sense of merging with the activity itself. So the boundary between you as a human mind and body and whatever activity you're doing. For example, if you're working on the computer, maybe you and the computer will merge. If you are snowboarding, maybe you and the board and the mountain will merge into one. If you are painting, then you and the paintbrush and the canvas will merge into one. So that sense of separateness dissolving is another characteristic of flow states. And it feels effortless when you're doing it. So that kind of gives you an idea of what it is, what defines it. And the cool thing is, we now, as of the last 50 years or so, have realized that we can train ourselves to experience flow more often and more deeply. And this involves just personal development training based on neuroscience. And this is the fascinating thing that I have gotten into in the last 4 years.
Yeah, so interesting. So interesting. And it makes sense. Like I could attest to everything that you were saying, like losing track of time. Like one, I get into a flow state when I'm doing these podcasts. Every episode, I mean, I have to have several timers because it always feels like a 10-minute conversation and it ends up being 50, which is what we want. Like yes, the intention is to have 45 minutes, hour conversation, but it never feels like an hour. And then also sometimes when I'm studying certain thing because I just love studying. Oh, Mars. Like I'm going into like an advanced deep course on the planet Mars, astrology training. And it's like, and there was one day where I literally felt merged with the energy of Mars. I even had to just, before I left my apartment, I had to pause because I had so much Mars energy within me and around me. I'm like, okay, let me come out of the flow state. Well, I didn't think about it that way, but reflecting back, it's like I had to kind of let the flow state thaw out or melt or subside, for a better word, and then carry on. So yes, I love that flow state. Now, my next question about the flow state is, does it rewire our brain for anything, for focus, for creativity, for healing, for evolution, for growth, or is it just a nice experience that's in the moment?
Yeah, it absolutely rewires our brain, especially when we can access it consistently. There, to answer your previous question as well, the the kind of model that I use to illustrate the benefits of flow from a practical perspective, we become more efficient. And so we unlock more time and more energy in our day. And with that time and energy, we can spend it on healthier habits, whether that is meditating more, exercising more, recovering mentally more, and just overall improving the efficiency of your human mind and body, and that creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Now, on the other side, the spiritual and emotional one, well, first of all, there's a link between flow states and transcendental spiritual experiences, as well as psychedelic experiences. Now, they generate feelings of love, of unity, of bliss, transcendence, even of being beyond the mind and body, kind of like the answer that I said to who am I and who am I not. Those experiences, as well as any non ordinary states of being, tend to be flow states. And so, of course, that as a single experience is going to rewire the way you see the world. If you have never felt unity connected with everything that is, and you feel it for the first time, you can go, wow, I finally get it when spiritual teacher says, you are one with everything. I have felt that state of consciousness. So that's one thing. But the second thing is really the consistency of the micro flow experiences that we can accumulate on a day-to-day basis. Because when we can train ourselves to get into flow when we're doing the dishes, when we're doing activities that we don't like so much, when we get into flow during work, making our taxes, we actually release a whole host of positive chemicals. We release dopamine, we release norepinephrine, anandamide, endorphins, and these neurochemicals keep us in flow, but they're also natural medicine. And so when we train our nervous system that, hey, look, we're getting into flow states more often and for longer and deeper, we're actually reprogramming our system to be in flow more often. So we raise our baseline level of flow. And we also tend to see the world from a happier perspective. And this was the original thing that has led to flow science, is a guy, Hungarian American psychologist called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was actually studying happiness. And in his studies on happiness, he found that people who were the happiest in the world were the ones who tended to experience flow states most often. And so it all adds up to this picture that actually reprograms your nervous system.
Beautiful. And I think a lot of us are familiar with getting into a flow state with things that we enjoy: yoga, cold plunge, talking with friends, cooking for some folks, painting. But you mentioned like we can get into a flow state even with those things that we don't enjoy. So, like, how does that work? Like getting into a flow state with taxes or cleaning the house. Or, I mean, I'm cleaning the house is enjoyable to me, but like anything that we don't really like, how does that work?
It's a great question. So there's a few different techniques and models, and there are some things to have in the background as well. So things in the background are things like mindset and self-belief. Like the stronger you believe in yourself, the more connected you are to your sense of purpose. Like if you can connect doing the dishes to your sense of purpose, you'll already amplify the chances of getting into a flow state.
Okay,
Whereas,
okay. So how do what would you I love that. I want to dive into that for a second. How would
yeah,
someone, because I don't know. Like I can't imagine myself. I'm looking at my dishes right now. I can't imagine myself connecting my purpose to those dishes. How would you help me with that?
so you're a business owner, you're a spiritual practitioner, your sense of purpose is going to be a strong one, and it's going to be connected to helping the world, right? Or providing value in some way. And so maybe connecting with the dishes doesn't feel like it's connected to that. But the link is you. When you have your self care, when you have your environment already, you set yourself up to shift the mindset in a place where you can go, okay, dishes are going to connect my purpose because they're gonna fuel me being in a better state to be able to serve. Because if I have undone dishes in the back of my mind, that's adding cognitive load in my brain. Or it's gonna, once I'm finished with my workday and I have zero willpower left, I'm not gonna have any willpower to do the dishes, right? So this is where you actually layer in the mindset and belief and purpose pieces, which are all the background kind of fundamentals of getting into a flow state, with the external techniques that are more the productivity neuroscience based stuff. So, number one, there's a flow cycle, and flow cycle has four stages: struggle, release, flow, and recovery. And when you can be in the other stages that are not flow right before doing the dishes, you'll enhance the likelihood that you can get into flow when you do the dishes as the next step, especially if you layer on flow triggers on top of that. So you might do them in a novel way, or you might do them with music that you really enjoy, or you might give yourself a scent that you have conditioned yourself to smell right before you enter a flow state. So this is like a Pavlovian trigger to be able to kind of, yeah, just trigger yourself to get into a flow state more easily. And so you kind of combine all these different things in order to maximize the chances of getting into flow.
Can you restate those four things about the flow state?
Yeah, so the flow cycle goes struggle, release, flow, and recovery.
Why is it important to kind of understand that framework? How can it help us?
That framework identifies all of the states of consciousness that we go through while we are awake and sleeping. So, for example, when we're sleeping, we're in a recovery state. It gets more complex and nuanced, and most people don't need to know how the brain changes in different phases of sleep. But when we are in a waking state, it's important to know the difference of the state of consciousness that you're in when you are learning something new, which would be struggle, versus when you're in a flow state and the task feels effortless. Like it's a different kind of embodiment. You're a different kind of forcing yourself to pay attention. Whereas flow comes effortlessly, kind of body based from the bottom up, and more habit driven, subconscious driven. The struggle phase is the opposite. It's more top down, really focused, trying to drive that learning. And the truth is, you actually need both. You need to learn what you learn in the struggle phase in order to create the neural connections that are going to then be leveraged in flow. And you need to sleep in order to make that permanent. So it's not a one-time thing. It's a thing that you use on a compound effect. But when you are able to realize, okay, I'm starting to get distracted, I'm starting to procrastinate, your body's telling you either you're uninterested in the task, it's completely misaligned with your purpose, or if you actually have to do it, then maybe your body is craving a recovery. And that's when you release. And so you release to flush out some of that stress chemistry in your brain, and then you can go back into something else more likely to enter flow. So it's about understanding the different states of consciousness that we're in order to improve your productivity, your efficiency, and your overall experience. And also just to be more aligned with how your body is meant to perform rather than force yourself to be on for 8 hours straight all day, pushing with willpower and discipline, and then breaking because you've overextended yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. This is so fascinating. Like we have this natural flow state that we just don't know enough about, especially early on in our life. And so a lot of us end up in these lifestyles where we are trying to force it. We're drinking a lot of caffeine, we're doing some pharmaceutical drugs, Adderalls, or whatever the thing is to like force ourselves to be productive or do all this, to kind of achieve or whatever, push through the struggle state, when this could actually, and it can and it does happen so naturally, especially when we surrender to the process and when we have awareness of it, which is what you're helping us understand so beautifully. What are some misconceptions about flow?
I think there's an idea that people should be in flow all the time, and that I train people to be in flow all the time. No, it's not that at all. Flow is actually a very fine balance because flow is quite energetically taxing. It's very efficient. Like you get a lot of experience and a lot of output when you are in flow, because your brain is trading conscious mind effort for subconscious intuitive processing, but it does use up a lot of energy. And so you really do need to focus on recovering, and you also need to focus on training yourself to be in the struggle. You need to focus on training yourself to persevere. There's so many different types of grits, skills that you can train yourself. So it's not all about flow, but flow is kind of the hype word that kind of makes it all make sense. And indeed, we are in a place where most people don't know, because it's such a new science, that they can get into flow states more easily and more frequently with just a few little tweaks to how they do things. And so that's why people have this idea that, yeah, will get more flow, and you will.
Yeah, powerful. So there was something that you said that just made me understand so much about my past 12 months or past couple years. And I don't think we have time to go into it because I'd rather ask you this question instead. What are one or two things that you get into a flow state with? And I'm sure you can do it with things that you don't like we talked about, but what are the things that you really enjoy doing in a flow state?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I have a few that are almost guaranteed when I am DJing. I'm just a hobbyist, not a pro, but when I DJ, I always get into flow. When I write something that is aligned with my purpose, I 95% of the time get into flow. And also when I'm playing poker, I would say it's a very high flow trigger activity for me. And then when I do creative activities that are not DJing as well, if I get into it, like making an art piece or something, then I'll often get into flow. But I don't do nearly as much of that as I would like.
Beautiful. Yes, absolutely. And what about productivity versus presence? I think you mentioned something really profound on that at one point. Do you want to talk about that really quick?
Yeah, I think the link is inseparable, like two sides of a coin. So the first thing one has to know is one cannot get into a flow state if one is not present. And so anything that takes us out of presence, or anything that disrupts the activity that we're doing is going to knock us out of the flow state. These are some of the flow blockers that we want to avoid. Um, but yeah, productivity is a fine line. The way I define productivity is the printout of your actions. I'm not talking about goals. I'm not talking about intentions. I'm not talking about accomplishment or work. I'm talking about if I wake up at 7:30 and I do this and then I do this and then I rest and then I do this and then I do this, that whole thing is productivity in my definition. And so I count rest as productivity. I count exercise as productivity. And so I'm very conscientious to separate the kind of work and accomplishment productivity from the overall actions that we take. And there's a very good reason related to the whole framework that I teach. When our productivity, as I define it, is misaligned from our higher self, then there is a root cause behind that, and that gap is a teacher for us. So if we procrastinate or if we intend to do exercise but we don't, we can look at that and we can examine what are the emotional roots or what are the systemic roots behind why I didn't do what I wanted to do. Like there's an inner conflict, and by examining it from a flow state perspective, we can get to a greater understanding of that conflict and eventually resolve it.
Yeah, beautiful. And so, how can the flow state, whether it's learning about it or being trained in how to access it, um, how well, I guess this is two questions. Can this be useful to people who are experiencing cognitive challenges, whether it's people who are undiagnosed ADHD, bipolar, whether it's diagnosed or not, autism, and anyone who's feeling like they have a disadvantage cognitively or that they have challenges or volatility mentally, um, how can learning about the flow state help them?
It's a great question. I think it very much applies. My life is a testimonial of that. I actually self-diagnose as ADHD. I actually went through the ADHD diagnosis process, And if I hadn't trained in flow years before, I would have definitely fallen in the range of getting the diagnosis. So I don't take this lightly. Flow has helped manage ADHD symptoms. Not only it trains the mindsets, it trains the beliefs, it trains the lifestyle habits like exercise and sleep. It gives tools for emotional regulation. It amplifies the cycle of creativity and learning and motivation, and so happiness. And on top of that, you also learn about your brain in its different states of consciousness. And so when you take all of these things together, not only do you get the psychological benefits of happiness, motivation, achievements, you also get um, the neurochemical boosts that being in flow gives you. So those amazing molecules for happiness and bliss, and painkillers naturally, and dopamine naturally. And so you know how to trigger flow naturally. You know what is going to cause more dopamine in your system and what's going to cause less dopamine in your system. And you can kind of make a conscious choice of how do you tweak your day-to-day life, your productivity, and your habits based on that. So it's really an all-round solution that is all natural and helps with so many aspects.
Okay, so this is not a misconception, but this might be a fear, or this might be someone's resistance to a flow state. So I'll see what your thoughts are on this. Some people think that if they get into a flow state, that they're not going to maintain groundedness, or being grounded or balanced, or connected to this earth, or something like that. Do you have a short insight on that?
It's a very complex one. I think you're right about fears because your body knows how to take you in and out of flow. Like it happens automatically. You don't press a button that says, get me into flow. You can condition yourself to set up the systems, set up the practices to maximize the chances of it. Your body will do the rest. And um, yeah, the need for grounding is often a need for mental recovery. Actually, I've been doing too much back to back. We're so conditioned in society to do that that actually it's probably a sign for taking a break rather than being scared of being too much in flow or too little in flow.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So much good stuff. Oh my God. I wish we had more time. Like, I feel like there's so many golden nuggets in this conversation. Um, any last statements that are about our topic? Any last words of wisdom, or even a suggestion as people might feel inspired from this conversation to take their next action step? Any words of wisdom around that?
I would say that flow is one of those meta skills. It amplifies every aspect of your life. And I don't say this lightly, and I don't say this because I teach flow. I will also share other meta skills that I recommend just as much as flow. So the first one would be learning how to learn. The second one would be emotional regulation. Third one would be flow, in no particular order. Like you don't necessarily need to learn them in any order. And another one would be habit science. So if you have time, if you have energy, if you're into self-improvement and you want to amplify anything in your life, then start with those four areas. And if flow is one that you haven't explored yet, explore flow because it will be surprising in terms of the novelty of things that you haven't discovered yet.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my God, so good. So please connect with Anthony if this conversation really resonates with you. We have his website here in the description. You just scroll down and click on it, his Instagram and his Facebook. What is one powerful way that people can work with you?
I teach a lot of things for free as a introduction. So if you're gonna explore flow, just hop onto my website, join the free course. You'll find lots of resources in there to get exactly what you need for where you're at in the journey. And there's no pressure or expectation to connect any deeper than that.
Beautiful. And do you have a book recommendation or a quote that you want to leave us with?
Um, one of the most impactful books in that I have come across is the book called Brain Energy by Christopher Palmer. He's a PhD plus neuroscientist, medical doctor type, working in mental health. And he is actually proposing a theory that unites all of mental health disorders with a single common root cause. It's a complex one, but it helped me make so much sense out of my bipolar diagnosis and also connect it with ADHD, depression, autism, and everything. So given how much misdiagnosis there is and um, how much information we're unaware of, I think this book is a game changer if you're interested in getting a little bit technical about mental
Mm.
well-being.
Thank you for that. That's a powerful recommendation. And I'm just saying that just because I could sense the energy around that piece of content. So thank you, thank you. Anthony, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your wisdom and being on the show. It was such an honor to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And if this conversation was so helpful to you, please share this with a friend, copy and paste the link. I'm sure you have already thought about one or two people who need to hear this. There's wisdom in here for someone, there's some medicine in here for someone. So make sure you share this conversation with a friend or family member. Namaste, everyone. Have a great day.